Welcome to the IT free training video on global names. Global names allow the user to find resources on the network using a short single name. For example, a word like intranet, rather than having to remember the whole name. This video will look at how this can be used and how to enable this feature on your network. When computers were first networked and started sharing files with each other, the networks were quite small in comparison to today. Also, it was not common practice for computers to be connected to the internet, and if they were, they would not generally be sharing files using the internet. At the time, to make networking simple, file sharing was performed using a flat namespace. Microsoft Windows used NetBIOS to provide the file sharing. NetBIOS, when it was developed, was not routable. For this reason, it could only be used to share files with computers that were directly connected to each other. Later, support was added to allow the protocol to be routed over the Internet. However, since the protocol was originally designed for small networks, NetBIOS in Windows only supports a 15-character name. When you have a small network, you can make sure that each computer on the network has a different name. This is not too hard to achieve. However, when networks started getting bigger and they started to be connected to other networks, this became quite difficult to have a flat namespace. For this reason, for larger networks, it makes sense to have a hierarchical namespace like DNS. Using a flat name is impractical, as is having a namespace limited to 15 characters. As the larger the network, the more likely you will have two computers that have the same computer name. Now consider the advantage of a flat file space to an end user. If the user wanted to access a file server, they could use the name file server. This is easy for them to remember. However, remembering a name like fileserver.itfreetraining.com is harder for them to remember and is a lot more characters for them to type in. You can see where a flat namespace can come in handy. Less characters to type in, and it is easier to remember a short name rather than a fully qualified domain name. Some of you may be thinking, I type in just the computer name all the time and Windows resolves it even though I am only using DNS. For example, if I open a command prompt and ping nydc1, you will notice that Windows will automatically ping nydc1.itfreetraining.local. itfreetraining.local is added automatically by Windows. These are referred to as the DNS suffixes. A DNS suffix is simply a fully qualified domain name without the host name. Each DNS suffix is tried in order. To the end user, this makes it easy for them to find services on the network without having to know the full address. This also means that the more DNS suffixes that are configured, the longer it will take for the operating system to report the address is not resolvable. This is because each DNS suffix has to be tested before the operating system will report the address not resolvable. If you only have a few DNS names, it is quite simple to configure DNS suffixes. If, however, you are part of a large network that has DNS namespaces added and removed on a regular basis, this becomes a lot more complicated, as the DNS suffixes need to be reconfigured as networks are added and removed from the network. Before Microsoft started using DNS as their primary name resolution, they used a system called WINS. WINS, or Windows Internet Name Service, is essentially DNS for NetBIOS names. Rather than using the host name that is used for DNS, it uses NetBIOS names. It supports dynamic updates, but does not support IPv6. NetBIOS names are limited to 16 characters. However, Windows uses the last character to identify the type of service that computer is supplying. For example, if the computer is a domain controller or not. For this reason, a NetBIOS name in Windows is limited to 15 characters. Since it uses NetBIOS names, the namespace is flat. This makes it good from a user perspective in that they only have to remember the computer name of the computer that they want to connect to. For this reason, when Microsoft started using DNS with Windows Server, as the primary name resolution system, WINS was supposed to be phased out. However, on some networks, WINS may still be used with DNS. The main reason for this is that since it has a flat namespace, it is easy for the user to resolve computers on the network. For this reason alone, WINS is still used on some networks today, even though it is being phased out. So, in order to phase out WINS, a system needs to be put in place that can be used to resolve short names, not fully qualified names, just like WINS did. So, is it possible to have this feature available in DNS just like it is in WINS? With Windows Server 2008, Microsoft has added the Global Names Zone. This adds support for single label names. A single label name makes it possible for a computer to access another computer using a short name rather than a fully qualified domain name. For example, if you had an internet server, you could have all the computers on the network access the internet server using the short name intranet rather than using the fully qualified domain name. Using Global Names Zone gives you the #1 feature supported by WINS that is missing in DNS, and also add IPv6 support. Using global names, hopefully the administrator can remove WINS from the network. In order to start allowing the client to resolve single label names, you first need to run the following command on every DNS server that will be answering DNS single label names. This will allow the DNS server to start answering queries for single label names. Once this command has been run, the next step is to create an Active Directory integrated zone called Global Names that is replicated forest-wide. When this zone is created, it should be created with dynamic updates disabled. This helps keep the zone secure, and you will see in a moment that you can still have records dynamically updated without reducing security of the zone. Once this is done, all that needs to happen is for a CNAME to be added to the Global Names Zone for each single name that you want to resolve. Your clients will then be able to resolve single label names using DNS. I will now change to my Windows 8 computer with Remote Administrator tools installed to have a look at how to configure and use global names. First of all, I will open a command prompt by selecting the Windows key and pressing X. This will bring up the Quick Launch menu, in which I will select the option for Command Prompt. From the command prompt, I will ping intranet. DNS will not be able to resolve this name. Windows will try each DNS suffix it has in order to find a match. The more DNS suffixes you have configured, the longer the process will take to tell you the name could not be resolved. The first step for configuring global name support is to run the command DNS command followed by the DNS server that you want to configure, followed by /config/enable global name support followed by a 1. This command needs to be run for all DNS servers that will be used with global names. The command changes the configuration of the DNS server so that it will respond when asked for single label names. If you find that the DNS server is not working, check that this command is configured. Next, I need to configure the DNS server. In order to do this, I will open Server Manager from the taskbar and then select DNS from the Tools menu. Once DNS Manager is launched, I will enter in NYDC1 as the DNS server to connect to when prompted. From DNS Manager, I will next expand down to Forward Lookup Zones, right-click it, and select New Zone to launch the New Zone wizard. Once I'm past the welcome screen, next I want to make sure that Primary Zone is selected and also the option Store the Zone in Active Directory is ticked, and then move on to the next screen. On the next screen, this will determine the replication of the DNS zone. Since this is Global Names Zone, I want to make sure that the top option, to all DNS servers running on domain controllers in this forest, is selected. global names can be used throughout the whole forest. In fact, that is the whole idea, to have a single name that can be used throughout the forest without having to worry about which domain the client is in. For this reason, make sure you always replicate the data to all DNS servers in the forest. On the next screen, configure the zone to not allow dynamic updates. If the user was able to make changes to the global name zone, they would be able to create a DNS record that would be used in all domains in the forest. On a large network, this is a security concern, so dynamic updates should be switched off. This is the last option for the wizard, so once I press Finish, the zone will be created. Now that the global name zone has been created, I will now go into the zone. I can right-click in the zone and select New Alias to create a CNAME. For the name, I will enter in Intranet. After this, I will press the Browse button and then navigate down until I find the DNS record for SRV1 in the itfreetraining.local zone. Once I press OK, the CNAME record will be created. If I look at the zone itfreetraining.local, you can see the DNS record SRV1. Even though the global name zone is not configured for dynamic updates, this DNS record can be dynamically updated. If I open the global names zone, notice that the CNAME record for intranet will point to the DNS record SRV1 and, once created, does not need to be changed. If changes need to be made, these can be done to the SRV1 record either by an administrator or dynamically. If I go back to the command prompt, notice that when I attempt to ping intranet, Windows will still not be able to resolve the DNS request. This is because the DNS server has had a configuration change to enable global name support. However, this change does not take effect until the DNS server has been restarted. To do this, I will right-click on NYDC1 in the DNS Manager and go down to All Tasks and select the option to Restart. Once the DNS server has restarted, notice that when I go back to the command prompt and I attempt to ping the intranet again, this time the address can be resolved. To configure an additional single label name, it is just a matter of creating the appropriate CNAME record in the global names. Thanks for watching this video from IT Free Training on global names. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.